I know, man.
It's so hard.
Dude, I believe it.
Okay, let's try it again.
Audience of one.
Here we go.
Audience of two.
Yeah.
Hey guys, Ryan here. I miss you guys. I can't wait to see you again, but until then, we wanted to hop on here and continue our series through the Sermon on the Mount with a message titled Treasure and Trust. You know, if there was ever a time to consider where you're storing your treasure, this might be it. As many of you know, we are in the middle of what could be an economic crisis. The stock market is plummeting. The unemployment rate is increasing. Families who have invested their entire lives into businesses are being forced to shut their doors, and it's devastating. Honestly, if there was ever a time to consider where I'm storing my treasure, this would be it. Now, I can't speak for you, but I know that for myself in a season like this, I have to ask myself, what am I really putting my trust in? Is it my savings account? Is it my job security? Or is it even in my typical Sunday community that I experience? If all those things are stripped away from me, what am I really left with? In fact, what am I truly trusting in? Because according to Jesus, your treasure and your trust are completely connected. Listen to what he says in Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 19, as he begins this discussion on treasure and trust. He says in verse 19, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." You see, these words spoken by Jesus some 2,000 years ago ring truer than ever. So when navigating your treasure here on this earth, your lot, your possessions, what you're finding security in, Jesus says the first directive is this: stop. Stop storing here. Listen to what he says in verse 19. "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal." You see, in the ancient world, treasures emanated from three primary sources: clothing, food, and jewels and supplies. But the problem was that each of these resources could either be stolen or destroyed. Jesus says where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. Moths would have eaten away at your clothing and deteriorated it. The rust was this idea of corroding, or the possibility of your food deteriorating and ultimately having a brief shelf life. Or really the idea of thieves breaking in and stealing. There weren't security systems in this day and age, so everything you had and possessed was vulnerable, was fickle, and ultimately was unreliable. So Jesus says, stop. Stop storing here. Stop trying to find security in everything that you have here. Now you may ask why? Why is Jesus so concerned with that? Really, the heart of the matter here is what we call self-sufficiency. It's the idea that all of us are trying to find security and comfort in what we possess here and what we have here, rather than in who we know. So Jesus says we have to stop. We have to stop trying to be self-sufficient and secure in what we have rather than in who we know. We have to stop. But the second direction Jesus gives us in the text is that we have to start. Listen to what he says as he continues. "But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal." The second point is this: start. Start storing there. You see, God is the greatest investment banker of all time. Everything you invest in Jesus that you use for kingdom purposes is completely secure, is completely protected and kept. Peter says it like this in chapter 1 of 1 Peter, that you invest into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade. It's an inheritance that is kept in heaven for you. That means that anything you use here and now to invest in kingdom purposes, that it's completely protected. It's completely secure and kept because God is reliable. One pastor said it like this: you can't take anything with you, but you can send it on ahead. In fact, in the Gospels, Jesus even says that anything you leverage here and now for kingdom purposes, with a mind of storing it there, Jesus says you'll receive 100 times as much as what you invest. Now, if you know anything about finances, you know that a return on investment of 100 to 1, those are pretty good numbers. Jesus says it like this in Matthew 19:29. Everyone who has left houses or brothers or sister or father or mother or wife or children or fields for my sake will receive 100 times as much and will inherit eternal life. Jesus is saying, listen, it doesn't matter what you have here or lose here. It could be your family or friends in this time of such uncertainty with our health or even our wealth. Jesus is saying you have a secure deposit in eternity because I am completely reliable. You can trust me with everything you have. So Jesus says, stop storing here and start storing there. Now, the last directive that Jesus gives us is really the heart of the whole matter. Listen to what he says in verse 21. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Jesus' last point is this: check. Check where your treasure is and find what your trust is in. I'll say that again. Check where your treasure is and find what your trust is in. You see, when Jesus says there your heart is, the heart was the core of a person. It was the center of their emotions, their will, and their reason. So the idea here that Jesus presents is when you find where your heart is, you actually figure out what your trust is in. Jesus is saying, trace your treasure. Wherever you're finding all your security or storing everything that you're trusting in, what you find is as you trace your treasure, you find your trust. Now, for most of us, we really don't know all the time where we're storing all of our treasure until one, it's either taken from us, or two, we are pressed with a choice. I'll never forget graduating college and entering the job market for the first time in my life. It was an extremely anxious season for me. I remember spending countless nights up praying and asking God for direction with little to no clarity at all. The first job offer I got was an extremely lucrative one. Now, I didn't grow up with a ton of money, and so it was extremely tempting for me, primarily because of the financial security it would have provided me and the comfort and opportunity I would have had because of the money. But the more I prayed about it, I just lacked a ton of peace about it because I knew that my motivation was completely for security here and now, not in the sense that I was trusting God with my life. Now, money is not a problem. It's not a problem to have money. The problem is when money has you. You see, God's not so concerned with what's in our hands. The problem is when what's in our hands possesses and controls our heart. Because Jesus is saying, listen, if you trace your treasure and where you're storing it, what you're finding security in, what you're finding out is that's what you actually trust in. Because your treasure and your trust are completely connected. And if you don't believe me, listen to how Jesus closes Matthew 6 with verse 24. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. So the question is, what am I supposed to do? If my treasure and trust are so completely connected, then how am I supposed to navigate my life here and now with what I possess or the money that I have, the time and the talent that God has given me? You may even think, Ryan, this message doesn't apply to me at all because I don't have any money. Maybe in this season you don't have anything at all. But the reality is this: you are storing somewhere. And all of us are finding our security in something or someone. The question is, where is that? So Paul when writing to his young disciple Timothy, leaves us with some really practical application I want us to consider. He says this in 1 Timothy chapter 6, starting in verse 17. Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. Paul says, listen, take your treasure, whatever you possess here, and I want you to consider two things. Number one is this: do good. You see, in this season, financially, you may be struggling, and that's okay. Listen, it's not just about money. It's about opportunity. Paul says, be rich in good deeds. Maybe you lack in money, but you have opportunity. Now, that's hard to navigate in a season where most of us are being forced into isolation in many ways. But consider, what would it look like to do good in this season? What would it look like to spend your time and your energy, your investment in the people you can, whether through a text message or a phone call, reaching out to folks to do good, to invest in things that are actually helping people just beyond your own measure of security for kingdom purposes, storing there and not here. Paul would say first, look to do good. The second thing he would say is this: be generous. With whatever you have, whatever possessions or property or money, look to be generous. In 1 Corinthians chapter 8, Paul would say it like this: in proportion to what you have, help. It doesn't matter how little or how much you have. It's really not how much your hands possess, but really the posture of your heart in the process. Paul says, be generous. Find a family in need or a friend in need, a local business in need, and look to leverage what you have to be generous for others. Paul even quotes Jesus saying, it's better to give than it is to receive. This is a better way of life, not trying to simply find all of your security in what you possess, but rather in who you know, knowing that God is completely reliable and you can trust him. Listen, group, your treasure problems are actually trust issues. So here's a question for you. When was the last time you found yourself in a position where you had to trust God? You see, with a teaching like this that is so antithetical to our entire culture, Jesus is asking you to put yourself in a position where you only have one option. That option is to trust God. All of us have the option of simply just storing more here, creating more security for ourselves, building in more self-sufficiency with what we have or what we possess or our money. Every one of us has the option of hoarding all of our supplies and going to H-E-B and buying everything that we find. But God is saying, listen, I want you to put yourself in a position to trust me, where I'm your only option, where you leverage your resources and your treasure here for a kingdom purpose, for people, and storing it with me there. Because when God is your only option, that's your best option. And without putting yourself in that position, you'll never know the truth of seeing a God who is completely reliable and completely faithful. You know, we've seen countless examples of this over the past few days, from a community group coming around a single mother in this time to help provide for her in need, from city officials encouraging us to continue to shop local so we can support the thousands of businesses that are being forced to close their doors, to the countless secret gifts that many of you have been giving with no recognition that we'll never know about until we get to heaven. Listen, the more you leverage your treasure here for kingdom purposes, the more you will build your trust in Christ now. Because if there was ever a time to check where you're storing your treasure, this would be it. Because according to Jesus, your treasure and your trust are completely connected. I love you guys, and I hope to see you soon.